One of, if not the biggest, mystery surrounding the original Resident Evil 4 and the remake is what happened to the children that lived in the village. It's pretty safe to assume that before the events of Resident Evil 4, the village was a very different place, filled with joy, happiness, kids running around playing with each other and helping their elders with their daily chores. Yet, what we see is a very different story. What was once considered a beautiful place has now become the gates of hell itself, a place where children simply do not exist. So, what actually happened to them? If you think that the lore of Resident Evil 4 is extremely disturbing, leave a huge like. If this video gets enough support, I'll make even more videos on the really effed up lore this game offers. Anyhow, before we start, this video is kindly sponsored by Gamersubs. Use code MIDNIGHT to get cool shit. Thank you so much for the support and I really hope you enjoy. There's two reasons as to why we do not ever see children in Resident Evil 4. One of them is that gaming developers avoid putting children into violent video games because of its mature implications. If they do, they may have problems marketing and selling their game on countries where it is not well received having children in horror and violent video games. For example, Dead Space was banned in Germany, Japan, and China for its high levels of violence. But we all know the real reason why it happened. Unfortunately, however, this is not the case in Resident Evil 4 and the remake. If we pay close attention to the notes that Leon finds through the entire game, we can conclude that children did live in the village. For example, it is mentioned that Chief Vitores Mendez taught the kids of the village literacy and mathematics during the day. The villagers lived a very traditional way of life. With no influence from the outside world, the village was still stuck in the 1800s. Most houses were made of wood. The villagers focused their time on growing their farms, maintaining their cattle, fishing, etc. Modern technologies like cell phones and TV screens were non-existent. To entertain themselves, the villagers opted for recreational activities like getting together to sing a song, education, partying with each other, and going to the nearby church every Sunday. They were so traditional that the village hadn't even transitioned to the euro and still used the peseta, which was the previous Spanish currency that was discontinued in 2001. In 1992, the men from the village built the ironworks factory. Since then, Chief Vitores Mendez opened the village to the outside for trade. Because of that, the village began to prosper and everyone became happier. The village folk were still very superstitious, believing in fairy tales and myths, passing these stories to their children and beyond. Unfortunately, one of these myths was no myth at all, that being the madness. One day, an old man was gravely injured by a wolf. He swore that he had shot the wolf clean through its brain, yet the wolf still lunged at him. The old man was able to make it back to his cabin, but his body began to move on its own, and he could hear voices inside his head. Afterwards, the old man fell gravely ill, and rumors of a madness began to spread among the villagers. To contain this madness, Chief Mendez set the cabin on fire, killing the old man and the madness with him. That man was Luis Serra's grandfather. The same thing had happened to several men from the village, but nobody knew why. The village was overlooked and ruled by Count Ramon Salazar, who sat on the castle not too far from the village. Ramon was the 8th generation owner of the castle and was seen as a ruthless, sick, and radical ruler. In his youth, Ramon threw sulfuric acid into one of his servants' face, all because she made a joke about his height. In contrast, Ramon is nothing like his great-great-grandfather, Count Gregorio Salazar, who is the first count of the castle and was seen by many as a hero, as he was the one to banish the growing cult Los Iluminados from the village in the 1500s, 500 years ago. This cult worshipped a parasite known as La Plaga and believed that one day La Plaga would rule the world and bring heaven down to earth, giving them their own paradise. For generations, the Salazar bloodline fought the Los Iluminados cult and the evil growing from within the underground caves of the castle. castle. The second generation Salazar was able to seal the parasites in the underground cave system of the castle, and for centuries, Los Iluminados has tried to get the parasite for themselves, but never had the chance to do so, until now. Ramon Salazar had a very tough childhood, having an extremely frail body thanks to the centuries of aristocratic inbreeding. At some point in his life, Ramon fell gravely ill, and with no method of curing his illness, his mother Catalina let the devil himself enter the castle. The specific events of what happened to the 7th generation Salazar family are unknown. What it is known is that Los Iluminados leader, Osman Sattler, gave Ramon's body what it needed to survive, that being La Plaga. The cult had successfully infiltrated the castle grounds and gained control of its count, Ramon. Now a faithful servant to Osman Sattler, Ramon, with the help of his loyal zealots, unsealed the caves that contained Las Plagas. Now, Sattler had two options: use the manpower they had in the castle to excavate Las Plagas from the caves, or use Ramon's influence over the village to use the villagers as guinea pigs to do the heavy work. And well, we all know what they did. One of the notes from the villagers states that he had taken a job as a miner on the castle grounds to gain some extra money, but once he came back, he began vomiting blood and began hearing voices inside his head, and the same thing happened to the villagers that went to the mine. It had already begun. The infection was already propagating. The Las Plagas parasite remained inside the cave system for so long that it naturally entered the spore stage of their life cycle to survive inside this extremely hideous environment. Thanks to that, when the villagers entered the mine to work, they got infected because of the Las Plagas spores they breathed in. In that regard, Las Plagas are very similar to the Flood from Halo. One single Plaga spore can eradicate a species. Now that the village was infected, Sattler entered the final stage of his plan: intervene. Because the village folk were still very superstitious, they were rather easy to manipulate. A big part of the villagers were already showing symptoms of the parasite taking control of themselves. Yet, for the villagers, this was the fault of the madness that had been haunting the village for dozens of years. Taking that into account, Los Iluminados descended upon the village from the castle, raised their flag, and began preaching about salvation and forgiveness, stating that they had the cure for the madness that had been rampaging the village for so long. Of course, that cure was none other than the Plaga injection. Everyone from the village was injected with the Plaga, even the children. The Plaga has two stages. First, it's an egg. Once it's injected into a host, the Plaga will hatch from the egg over time and grow within the body of the host. When the Plaga reaches maturity, it will latch itself into the host's spine and nervous system, taking complete control of its body and mind. This process is extremely painful to the host. Vomiting blood frequently, passing out, and having extreme hallucinations could be considered the norm. The process is so insufferable that an undeveloped human will simply not resist it, in this case the children of the village. For the Plaga to reach maturity, it needs a developed body to survive. If the body isn't developed, the Plaga will simply die, and if the Plaga dies, the host dies as well. The reason why there aren't any children in the village was because Osman Sattler basically killed them by giving them the Plaga. Another reason as to why all of the children from the village died was because ever since the village became infected with Las Plagas, the Ganados became unable to maintain the village and its resources. As stated in Chief Mendes' log, a ton of people died of starvation, and the village was suffering a wave of endless famine, yet Lord Sattler's orders were absolute. Whether or not that was his actual intention is not known. What it is known is that Sattler succeeded in turning the entire village and the castle into mindless slaves that will die for their master. Hello my friends, thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, consider leaving a like and subscribe to get more Resident Evil 4 videos. Have an awesome day and stay safe. Adios. Bye.